this tutorial I'd like to show you some ways to find and fix warped faces and sharp edges. To do this tutorial you need to have the 3D print tools installed. If you have a version of Blender 2.67 or later, you should be able to enable it. In the user preferences, go to add-ons, so add-ons, enable all the support levels so we can search in everything, type in print, and we get a mesh 3D print toolbox with a little checkbox to the right. It should be checked. If it is, save the user settings, and you should have in the toolbox the print 3D section. Once you have this, we can go and see whether this model, this is Blue on Fire, it's a version of Blue I made a while ago, see whether he has any issues. So first let's have a look at distorted faces. I will give you the most basic example by adding a fresh new plane, make it a little bit smaller, and see it is perfectly flat right now. If we go into edit mode and we take a point, we just move it up, and maybe we take another and move it down, you can see it is no longer flat. This is a distorted face. It doesn't have to be a bad thing. It usually resolves itself. It has a fold somewhere, so it's actually two triangles. This is one thing to remember: triangles cannot be distorted faces. Now I don't think this one is distorted too much. I'll make it more extreme, and let's find out how we can see if we have something that's distorted, which is very clear in this example. You go to the print 3D tools and you click on the distorted button. In this case it tells us 0 flat faces because it's actually, this angle is not 45 degrees, it's a bit less, so I'll check for 20 degrees, and we have one non-flat face which I can select by clicking on this button. So I know this face is non-flat, it is distorted. If I want to make sure nothing on my mesh is distorted, one thing I could do is convert everything into triangles. Triangles cannot be distorted at all. So if I go into mesh, faces, and I say triangulate faces, or I just click Ctrl T, it becomes two triangles. If I check again, there are 0 non-flat faces. This is how to check and how to fix it in a very, very simple way. Let's have a look at a proper model. So I'll go back into object mode and select blue. I can also go in here and click distorted, and it has 63 non-flat faces, which I can select like this. Now they are selected and I know which ones I want to have a look at, but it's not the nicest way to work. This check you use to see if there is anything that is non-distorted on your mesh, to make sure that everything is nice and flat and even. To work on it, to fix these distortions, you want to use the mesh debug view. I will enable it here, and you see nothing change. The reason for that is that in the version of Blender that I'm working on, 2.67, it doesn't work yet with geometry influencing modifiers. So we go to the little wrench symbol, and I happen to have a subsurf modifier on this model. I can disable it for edit mode, and instantly you see the mesh debug is working. It doesn't influence my selection at all, it just creates a layer of color that shows me where problems might have arisen. Now currently it's in overhang mode, that's a different tutorial. I want to look at the distortion. I will go into distort, and you see a lot has been marked as being distorted. This is because the bottom has been set to 5 degrees, which is way low. 5 degrees isn't really warped. We will set it a little higher. Let's make it 25 for instance. You can see it's a lot less, and let's make the maximum 60. So everything that is over 60 is completely red. everything between 25 and 60 degrees gets a relevant color. Now let's see how we can fix it in another way than, we don't want to triangulate everything all the time. So I will go into edit mode. I'll enable this little symbol so you can see what I am clicking on. And you instantly, with this red face, you can see how distorted it is. If we look at it from below, this is not flat. If I take this point and I move it down, you can see the color changing. It becomes more and more flat. This is much neater. Same goes for this one. If I look at it like this, the point behind disappears behind an edge. You see, this is sticking out and then going back in. So we can take this, move it down, and it's more flat. Another way to do it is by selecting some points and smoothing it automatically. So I've selected this entire face. I go to my tools and I say smooth my vertices, and I smooth it and it becomes flatter and flatter. Though sometimes, as you saw just here, the surrounding faces may become a little bit sharper. So you can smooth, or you can look manually to see if you can move some verts around. See, this one on the left becomes flatter now, but these become more pointy. It's very easy to move things around and not end up fixing these. This is basically how you can go around your mesh and smooth all of this stuff. And you saw before I had 63 non-flat faces. I know I haven't fixed everything. If I check again, now it's only 59. So really quickly, I've taken 4 of them off. When I've gone down to 0, I should have a really neat mesh. Very much related to distorted faces are sharp edges. I will once again go back into object mode to show you how to create one. I'll add a plane, make it a little smaller, and create an edge going through the plane by using loop cut, Ctrl R. So I have an edge in between two planes and I can move it up, and this becomes a sharp edge, right? Let's have a look whether we have one in the 3D print tool. Well, 160 degrees is pretty damn sharp. I would have to go very far to get that. I don't think we get it yet. Let's see if there's anything sharper than 90 degrees. I do a check and there's one sharp edge, and I can select it by clicking on the button. This again is really nice, and if we go into Mesh Debug and select Sharp Edges, you can already see this edge has turned green. Now 180 degrees is very sharp, maybe a bit much. I would say everything over 120 would be a problem, and less than 90 isn't. And I can drag it down to flatten it more and more until I'm happy it's not too sharp. This is the basic example. Let's look at the proper model. So I go back to blue, into edit mode, and Mesh Debug is also on sharp. And you can see there's a few places that we have a problem. It's also very clear there's two different types of sharpness that we cannot look for right now. It might become available in the future. You can see here, if I select the point in the middle, this is sharp because it's concave, so it's folding in on itself. On these, for instance, it is sharp because it really becomes sharp on the outside. It's convex. Both are fixed in a very similar way. One, for instance, could be to select all the points that are highlighted and smooth them. I'll go into the Edges menu or the Specials menu and say Smooth, and you see it becomes less red. I can do it a bit more often. Of course, in this case, 7, 8, 9, do it 10 times and it looks a lot smoother already. A lot of the time though, this makes your geometry lose its shape, so you don't really want to do that. Instead, what you can do is look from a nice angle and just move the points around manually. Smoothing can be nice, and in this case I think 90 degrees is very acceptable because we have all squares. Just look at it and make it more square. So I think there was a problem maybe if I'm over 100, and yeah, that makes it, I have to make it very sharp. So let's make it 140 and 120 for instance. So now this is no problem, but I still have some colored ones. And you see, having this check isn't only about sharp edges. Sharp edges aren't always a problem if you go to print. Only if you make a very, very long, thin, sharp point that cannot support its own weight does it really become a problem. What it is more about is that it's an indication that shows you bad geometry. The same thing happens with the distorted faces. Like here, it has become sharp because it's a bit of a mess. This shouldn't be here in this shape. So I will look in wire mode for a moment, and this is, see, now it's better. This one, these two were in the wrong position. I'll Control Z. This was going inside the other one. Now it's a little bit cleaner, and I think this is very messy as well. It's not a very clean mesh, and actually I have printed this guy before and he turned out okay, but this is a very good indication of there being an issue somewhere in that area. The same here. This, you can see it's poking in itself if I just move it out. So there was a sharp edge, but the sharp edge was an indication of something else being wrong. And with all of these, the check means this looks okay to me, but before I sign off on it and I say it's really, really okay, sharp edge wise, I will do a check on the left, and I was doing everything over 120 degrees, and click here. And if the result here is 0, I'm absolutely sure, because the mesh debug only gives you a visual indication. There could be something wrong that you just can't see because it's on the other side of the model or under an armpit or between some fingers. And this one, the 3D print check, will give you the result and make sure there's nothing on your model. This will just show you where you happen to be able to see it. So much for distorted faces and sharp edges.